Governor Berger recently filed his budget plan for the next fiscal year. Much of the attention has been on a proposal for health coverage, but the governor also has plans for short-term rentals, the rainy day fund, and response to the opioid crisis. One of the groups analyzing the plan is the Mass Budget and Policy Center. We'd like to welcome its executive director, Noah Berger. Thank you very much for being with us, Noah.
Great to be here.
First of all, about the health care, because with all of the uncertainty around the Affordable Care Act, I guess that's one more reason for the governor to look for maybe some new revenue around this.
Yeah, the governor proposes something in this budget which I think is pretty significant and could have a real positive effect. A trend that we've seen over the past several years is that more and more employers are not providing health care coverage for their employees, and the employees instead are being covered by the state Mass Health program or Medicaid program. For the employers, that's a pretty good deal, because rather than spending $5,000 a year or so on health insurance, they get it for free and the state pays for it. It's actually not that bad for the workers because Mass Health is a pretty decent health care program. The problem is it's shifting a lot of costs onto the state budget, and that makes it much harder to balance the budget. So what the governor proposed is an assessment on companies. So if a company provides health insurance, it's costing about $5,000 or more. If they save that $5,000 by not providing coverage, then they're now going to be required to send $2,000, a fraction of that, to the state to help offset the cost of health insurance being paid for by the state. So that both could incentivize some more private sector employers to provide insurance, but also provide a way to pay for insurance if it in fact is the state that ends up paying for health insurance for people who are working for those employers.
I can right away imagine all these entrepreneurs saying, "How dare you tax us?" And if you do tax us like this, we're not going to hire as many people. Couldn't that happen?
I mean, there's no evidence of that. These are the businesses that we're talking about are businesses that are saving money by not insuring their workers. I mean, one simple answer is employers should provide health insurance for their workers, and if they're doing that, they're not going to be subject to this assessment. But if instead they choose not to provide health insurance for their workers, or if the workers don't take the health insurance and end up getting it from Mass Health or somewhere else, there's a savings there for the business. And this is simply saying that we use some of that savings to help pay for the insurance that these people will be receiving. And I think this is an important policy that the governor is proposing, because in the long term, you want the state healthcare system to be sustainable. That is, you want to make sure we have adequate resources to provide health insurance to people who need it. We want to also encourage private sector employers to keep providing health insurance. And those are real problems. And he's come up with a serious solution that tries to really address the problem at its source.
We hear a lot about economic recovery in Massachusetts, and certainly in Boston, all this building and expansion. And yet, when I hear people talking about revenue for the state, it's not that impressive.
It's true. The revenue has not come back as much as people might think it would. Part of that, I think there are a lot of reasons, and the truth is some people aren't sure. Sales tax revenue has been pretty slow. Part of that is the areas where there's growing spending are often not areas where we are taxing. So services are exempt from the sales tax. A lot of spending growth is in services. And goods, the things that we do tax, actually have seen a little bit of deflation, or certainly costs aren't rising. So if people are spending the same amount on goods, we're not going to see new revenue there. The other bigger picture piece is that overall our tax system is kind of upside down. Our highest income people pay the smallest share of their income in taxes, and low and middle income people pay more. But most of the income growth over the past decade and longer has been among very high income people. And when the income is growing among people who are least likely to be paying taxes at the same rate as others, that hurts your long-term revenue sustainability.
Well, over the past year, we had a fiercely fought battle over charter school expansion. What about funding? Because funding was a big part of that issue last year as well.
Yeah. I think the education debate going forward could be a really positive, constructive debate where people from different points of view may come together and say, well, what are the things that we know really work and actually help kids to do better in school and in life? And we know there's evidence for things like early education, smaller class size. There's also a well-rounded education with art and music, as well as regular in-classroom activities or core academic activities. I think that's the question is, what are those things that are most effective, and will we actually be able to make the investments in those things that will improve schools all over the Commonwealth? The governor's budget doesn't really make much progress there. It has a small increase for K through 12 education, about at the rate of inflation overall.
We're talking with Noah Berger from the Mass Budget and Policy Center. Noah, the governor is, speaking of taxes, he's maybe allowing some new levies on, short-term rentals, bed and breakfast, Airbnb. Explain what he's got in mind.
So this is one of those unusual cases where a new industry says, we actually think we should be taxed. And the Senate last year proposed a plan to tax them. The House has been talking about trying to do the same thing, and the governor put forward a plan. So we're talking about Airbnb and related types of companies where individuals can rent their apartments or their rooms in their houses out to folks. Many of these people actually operate, fairly large numbers of rooms or operate for a large part of the season. So in many ways, it's similar to what happens in a hotel. If I'm going to a new town, I can look at an online site or a hotel and just choose a room. And if I go to a non-hotel currently, I don't pay the room occupancy tax. So the governor's proposal is a tax that's similar to the hotel motel tax that would apply to these online rentals. He makes it pretty narrow, where he only subjects it to the tax if the person doing the renting rents out for more than 150 days in a year. That's a pretty high bar. The Senate had a much, much lower bar. I think there's interesting questions about exactly where that line should be drawn, where you're sort of crossing that line from just being somebody who occasionally rents a room to somebody for whom it's a sort of a business.
And of course, I know Representative Michaelowicz has filed legislation again, and I guess one of his ideas is to give local communities more power to restrict the proliferation of those B&B arrangements too.
Yeah, I think that it's a sort of new industry in a way, and I think asking all of those questions about what's good about it, what's problematic about it, what would be the right way to tax it, what would be the right way to regulate it, I think those are going to be important questions that we'll be debating, the legislature will be debating.
The governor is trying to go for a bit of a comeback on the rainy day fund. We haven't been worried about that too much in recent years, but there will always be a time when it's going to be pretty important.
Yeah, in recent years, the state has not been putting into the rainy day fund the amounts of money that you would like to be seeing going in good times, and it hasn't even been putting in the amount that our existing laws say you should put in. So the governor makes some changes, and it's honestly hard to know exactly how they'll play out. One of the changes is currently the capital gains tax is one of our most volatile taxes. In good times, you get $2 billion a year. In bad times, a couple $100 million. We've had a law that says when you get more than sort of the long-term average of a little bit over $1 billion a year, everything over that amount goes into the rainy day fund, so that you don't build your budget based on revenues that are volatile that you could lose immediately in the next recession. So our law says everything over that average amount goes into the rainy day fund, but we haven't actually been doing that as a state. We've been using that money to balance the budget year after year. The governor proposes a change where he says instead of all of it going into the rainy day fund, half of the amount over that goes into the rainy day fund, but that happens at the beginning of the year. And I think the thought is that this would actually be a rule we would follow, that technically it's actually reducing the amount that we're going to the rainy day fund, but the reality is we haven't been putting any of that money for the most part into the rainy day fund. So as a sort of middle ground, the idea is make it a little bit easier to do and then do it. I think it's an open question about whether that's wise or whether we really should aim for making sure that the full required deposit is what should go into the rainy day fund.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Great, anytime.
Noah Berger from the Mass Budget and Policy Center. We'll have more news in just a moment.